Eric Arauz is an East Brunswick resident and a published author. His most recent book is called An American's Resurrection. The book is an autobiographical account of his life from child abuse and mental illness to salvation. It's a remarkable story. Eric is a Navy veteran of Operation Desert Storm. In the book, he tells of his suffering from PTSD and how he spent 24 hours in 4-point restraints in a maximum security psychiatric hospital. From this very low point, he slowly recovered. Eric now travels the country lecturing on such topics as bipolar disorder and suicide prevention. Eric has written a compelling and inspiring book, and I'm pleased that it has brought him to our studio here in East Brunswick today. Eric, tell me, how did you come to write this book?
Well, Angus, probably about 7 years ago, I had started a job where I started going around the country as an inspirational speaker. And the more I toured and the more places I saw, you actually realize how big the country is. So, which I learned in American Studies.
Yeah.
And I realized that if I don't put my story in writing, I'll get to a certain amount of people via audience, but there are a lot of people that will never actually hear the story about where I was, what happened, and eventually what I'm doing now.
So you're trying to reach out to more people.
I was trying to make sure that people, oftentimes of what I talk about, it's very personal. There's lots of different traumas, and the experience is something that people relate to. So oftentimes an audience won't feel that comfortable coming and approaching me, and oftentimes a story in print can let somebody titrate in and out of a situation, develop a language for their own experience, and at the same time regulate themselves.
And you studied literature in college. You went to Rutgers. And so can you tell us, like, what role did the study of literature in college play in your recovery?
It's very unique. The whole idea behind the book is that you can get to certain places in life that you don't actually understand what happened to you. And while there may be clinical language that can tell you what's wrong with you currently as you deal with it, you don't have that language to wrap around and create a synthesis in yourself. So by the time I had gotten to Rutgers, I had gotten out of the Navy in 1994. My biological father was also a veteran. He had undiagnosed mental illness, eventually was diagnosed but wouldn't get help. So he actually, in East Brunswick, he ended up losing his home and dying homeless. I got out of the military. I had the same diagnosis, bipolar 1, was in a maximum security VA psychiatric hospital. They said I would never get out. So by the time I got to Rutgers, while I was trying to build my life forward, I had no way to translate what had happened, and I found a collective voice in many of the 19th century existentialists, the people that were writing about a firsthand experience with this world coming out of the Civil War, trying to put together how a country could do that to themselves. Well, it was a parallel process. While I sat in the classes trying to figure out how do I come alive, I could take the notes of Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau, and not learn them to be regurgitated and forgotten, but actually take them on as an existential ethos, as a way to really start creating a map for my life.
Well, I guess a related question, what role does language play in change?
It's unique in that, considering what I do for a living, many people can feel something and not be able to narrate it, and they'll get lost in the feel. So uniquely, as a veteran, when I went to boot camp, when they change your language, it's not so much your clothes. I could put on a Navy uniform today, doesn't mean I'm in the Navy. I can change I can get tattoos, I can do all the things, but when they change the way you address yourself, when I go from Eric Arauz to Seaman Recruit Arauz, Billet 001, that negates all the known monikers I have. and you can actually start to navigate your insular journey. And as you rename things, you actually find new ways to motivate yourself, identify yourself, and ideally identify the world.
In your book, I think you refer to applied existentialism. What do you mean by that?
In An American's Resurrection, I'm an East Brunswick native, and there's a school in East Brunswick called St. Bartholomew's. And my father tried to actually end my life at St. Bartholomew's when I was 12, and that started in trauma, what they call constriction, and eventually a deadening or an absolute passivity where I sort of lived dead. So when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do and get to that place at Rutgers, I couldn't just learn about existence. I couldn't just read Nietzsche. I couldn't just look at Thoreau. I needed to apply these things. I said to myself, if scientists read science books and learn about the elements and actually create change, if people in 12-step meetings read a book and change their lives, if religious organizations live out of a book, why can't I take every book? Because coming to school at 28, 29 at Rutgers, I didn't look at these authors as others. I saw them as equals trying to write about what they experienced and pass down over the millenniums their knowledge for others to not have to go through what they went through. So an applied existentialism is figure out what your own code is. The Navy gave me a code. They let me believe in something to die for. What applied existentialism did is it allowed me to formulate a recipe to live for, and therefore create my own doctrines of existence.
Well, from what you've said, I guess I wouldn't wish suffering on anyone, but maybe in the long run, you benefited by entering Rutgers at age 28 instead of age 18. Maybe you were more ready for higher education.
I absolutely did, and I believe that I do a lot of work in suicide prevention, and one of the key things you have to do in suicide prevention is just initially break somebody off a fixed thought. Allow them just a little bit of air so they can see all that's happening. By the time I had gotten to Rutgers, I was no longer in the trajectory of parochial school to East Brunswick High School to college. I had seen the world. I had been to Egypt. I had fought in a war zone. My norms were not the norms I returned to. So in the heart of darkness, everybody looks at Kurtz as coming back onto the boat saying the horror, and thinking that he feels bad about what he did. I've had a 12-year argument with Jackson Lear saying, what if he just didn't want to be back in the constraints of normative thinking? And if you can come back like Heraclitus talked about with fire, fire changes things forever. Suffering can be a way to negate down to who you are, in what Kafka called a literal negation to that thing that's you. And to be at Rutgers with all these swirling currents, with all these ways to learn, to be an American Studies major and learn music as well as policy, to see the country becoming aware of itself as I became aware of myself. It gave me guides to try, to not say this is how I have to, for lack of a better term, die, but that I could actually live.
Now, you also mentioned something about Dante and Virgil. Compare and contrast? Is that where we're headed with that?
A little bit. The idea now is, especially with the medical models and the idea of therapy, is everything is, if I have an issue, I will go to somebody and they will help me, but they're not in it with me. And what's unique about when Dante went through his internal journey of the 9 circles of hell, he wasn't alone. The poet Virgil was there. So when you had initially asked me about suffering, suffering can be beneficial, but I think you need a Virgil. You need somebody you're roped off to, like the Navy SEALs. The way the Navy SEALs train in their swimming exercises is you rope off because you're both agreeing you're going into an unknown. It's just the other person has been in that unknown before. So the Virgil model is the idea that, unlike a 12-step model where there's a sponsor and a sponsee, there's no power differential. It's a way to relate to somebody, say, I've been there, and then if you need to be a Dante, if you need to go through your own circles of hell, you find somebody else that's been there, and that way you can learn the lessons. And that way you don't just theoretically learn about it, you apply it, do it, believe it, and create an entirely new belief system.
Now, you once said joining the Navy was the greatest decision of your life, but I'm not quite sure what you meant by it. Was that a good experience or a bad experience or just a necessary experience?
I think there's a way for me to say all those are correct. Coming out of East Brunswick, I may or may not have had certain run-ins with the law at a very early age where I had a way of thinking that may not have agreed with certain local ordinances. So by the time I was 19, I had gotten to a place where I had to join the military, and my stepfather was on board for that. I went down to the Marines, and my stepfather, who was a 1950s Marine, he's like, "You're not a Marine, Eric." He goes, "You have a different way of thinking." And when I walked into the Navy and joining the Navy and then being on a ship, being able to loosen myself from the moors of what I thought, constantly being exposed to something so much greater than myself, allowed me, when I came back to school and to life, to sit there and say, there's always more than I know. It's not a static norm. And sometimes certain decisions are so congruent to the way you think that you bloom. So being a sailor forever has allowed me to ship out into unknowns and come back and try to deal with what it is to be on land and synthesize those things. But going over to the Red Sea, crossing the Atlantic, being on top of still the greatest unknown that we have. To be a sailor is to link with the ancient. It's to know that you'll never be able to control this body of water. Let go of that and allow in certain ways of thinking that may not be the way that you normally take things in.
Now, you came back and you were discharged from the Navy, and then, how do I put this? You were so disturbed that the East Brunswick police had to come and get you.
Right, right. And the East Brunswick police really are incredibly well trained. A large part of the book, An American's Resurrection, is not just my journey. It's the journey of a son actually following his father's footprints, his father's path, but because of certain interventions are the only reason I lived. And when my father had the same issues that I had, he was also bipolar and started showing symptoms. He didn't get any help. It was a different time in the early 70s. By the time it happened to me in the 90s, and I had come back from Memphis, Tennessee in my first episode, awake 13 days, the East Brunswick police came in and handled me gently because they were trained enough to know that I was having a psychotic break and that I was not raging or on drugs or those kind of things. And because of that intervention, it allowed me to get treatment. So you'll find out that most stigmas are broken by face-to-face interaction. The East Brunswick police had no stigma against me. I would have probably had more stigma against police coming in my house. So it had become a genesis for me to go around the country and now the world trying to educate people that those of us that have serious mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, the invisible wounds are not monsters, that these are biological disorders. And that actually started here in East Brunswick with such a well-trained police force that actually handled somebody in a way that started me on a path where I get to help thousands.
So it's fair to say that in some way you owe your life to the East Brunswick police.
I would say I owe my life to East Brunswick. The very unique thing about An American's Resurrection is that it's an international book. It's in Australia. I'll be out at UCLA in a week. The entire neuropsychiatric hospital bought it. But I'm a Jersey guy. So I had a very large book deal, and they wanted creative control. I pulled back, got a small publisher, did it myself. Took 4.5 years, 2 years of writing, 2 years of editing. But now, as it's launching, I knew I did it right. And it's being in East Brunswick, which is quintessentially a town of people that that do. It's a town that has a wonderful public high school. It's a town where you see people achieve in many, many ways. And to be a St. Bart's graduate, to be an East Brunswick High School graduate, the book actually goes everywhere from Riders Lane to the Pyramids of Giza. And it's in that locality and that provincialism that you'll actually see the larger picture in the different truths.
Yeah. Now, you use the phrase in the book, come alive. What do you mean by come alive again?
A lot of the speaking I do is just cultural / inspirational, and I feel oftentimes, especially if you look on college campuses, the largest drugs being used are opiates and Adderall. So 20 years ago, you had drugs that people used to feel more. Now you have drugs used to feel less, a deadening, a pushing away. You have smartphones. You have everything put in front of you to not see the world, to not feel the world. And I can sit there and talk about cancer, bipolar disorder, and any type of ailment, but ideally, at their base, it's disconnection. It's this feeling that you don't link to the world, and when something goes wrong biologically, you don't link to yourself. So what I pride myself on, something I call a limbic language, is a way to get inside somebody, light that fire again, let them know they're not alone, no matter what it is, and that they can come alive in this moment and start to redictate what they're doing. If you can give somebody that, you'll find people start stepping back into themselves and not being so distracted by so many things. Life is not that different. It's what I said about the Navy. No matter how technical it gets, it's an ancient thing to push off and go to sea. We need to keep that anti-modernistic zeal in certain things, or we'll get so swept off that we won't have any anchors. And a sailor without an anchor can never come back to port.
And finally, your work is now largely based on suicide prevention. Why did you choose to specialize in that aspect?
Suicide prevention and suicide in general is also an ancient discussion. So when you see all the new models get put out about the different ways to assess, they still can't figure out why Socrates would have taken his life and how Philo wrote about it. You'll find more out about it reading Madame Bovary than you will in clinical journals. And it's an ancient discourse for me to sit with someone, to be, in this case, a Virgil, and say, I understand the pain. I understand what it means to think life is never going to change. And in that moment, I get to find that divinity by association that lets me help somebody live. The rest is up to them. I consider myself a firefighter. I'm going to go in, I'm going to pull you out of the flames, and then you go do what you want. So suicide prevention to me is not the study of death. It's actually the study of life, like an existential thantology. And I believe that if you understand that your days are finite, and in each moment you can do something, then you'll be able to utilize that existential alchemy to sit there and make you into something more than you think you can be, but at its core, realize that life's still a mystery and not fixed.
Eric, you signed the papers to join the Navy. Where did you go to boot camp?
I ended up going to boot camp first in Orlando, and then I was an electronics technician. So I ended up in school in Orlando and then Great Lakes, Illinois. And then I was a specialist in fleet-based satellite communications, the NavMax V2 system. So I ended up going out to San Diego for that. My mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer, so I picked a ship back in Norfolk, Virginia.
See, because you wanted to be on the East Coast.
I wanted to be close enough to New Jersey. She was actually, it was stage 4 cancer, and we didn't think she was going to survive. So I ended up wanting to be close enough that I could drive home.
So electronics technician, you said? That would be kind of analogous to what used to be radio operator in a way.
Exactly right. They have radio men in the Navy. Why I took the job was I initially was leaving for the Navy as a sonar technician. I have Poland syndrome. I have one chest muscle. It's a 1 in 100,000 birth defect. The day I was leaving, they said I couldn't go. So I came back 6 weeks later with a waiver. I asked my recruiter, what job would you pick if you could pick any job in the Navy? He said electronics technicians, because radio men operate the gear. All you do is fix it if it breaks.
Oh, it's about fixing the broken radios.
That's all we did. It was preventive maintenance. And in my case, when you're out in the Red Sea, you have line of sight communication, you have signals and signalmen with flags, but then you had to have satellite communications. So I had to maintain to make sure that the ship could stay in contact back to D.C.
And what was your rank when you were discharged?
I was discharged as an E4. I was lucky enough to make E4 coming into the Navy. If you finished school, you became a third-class petty officer. And I would say I was an aggressively average sailor, so I stayed in E4, and I was discharged medically under honorable conditions for a bunch of foot operations.
So you're petty officer third class?
I was a petty officer third class.
Okay, and what kind of a ship were you on?
I was on a Spruance-class destroyer, DD-977, the USS Briscoe. They call it the Cadillac of the fleet. So we had a 61 Tomahawk missiles. That had been put on before we went over to Desert Storm. And it was a great ship. It would be by far the turning point of my life to actually spend that exact day, almost to the day, the year I spent on that ship.
And I presume you made friends while you were...
I've made friends that I'm still friends with. There's this unique bond that you get in the military that no matter how much time you spend with people. So an individual I spent 2 months with, I'll be out in California in about a month with him, and probably 5 or 6 of my good friends, I'm still just as close, and we pick right back up each time when we see each other.
Now, you told me earlier about a program, Heroes to Heroes. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
It's a wonderful organization. What they do is they take 10 disabled veterans, anywhere from 80 to 100% disabled with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They take them to Israel. And the idea is it's an immersion type of therapy because Israel is a veteran culture. And less than 1% serve now. So these young men are coming back from combat.
Less than 1% in the U.S.
Correct. Less than 1% in the United States serve. So people come back out of this intense, close-knit organization. Their lives change mentally and physically due to their injuries. And they don't know anybody. Nobody speaks that language. That communion is gone. So Israel is a place where the doctors are veterans. Everybody's a veteran. Primarily, the whole country has to serve. So you bring these individuals in because with the high rate of suicide happening right now, you'll see that by the most current models, that suicide can oftentimes be broken down into a lack of belongingness and a feeling of burdensomeness, how fixed those perceptions are, and the capability to end one's life. Well, veterans have some of the highest capability. They feel a burden when they come back. They thought they were saving the world. I thought I was saving the world. You don't belong. People don't understand you. You don't understand yourself. You have that, what I call that existential illiteracy. You can't put it together. So what this does is it unites these individuals. You get to bring them over. You have them form bonds. The Heroes to Heroes organization will base these 10 individuals in New Jersey as they'll be residents. And we'll find a way to help these young men come alive because we all signed a paper to die in battle, every one of us. We didn't think that we'd have to live dead. So these men deserve that, and women, to at least have our best efforts to bring them back to reality and to life.
So who pays for the airfare and the lodging and all that?
The Heroes to Heroes organization has donors, they have fundraisers, everything is free. I'm going to go over as the team leader. What I will do with the president of the organization is just make sure that these gentlemen get to where they have to get to. If they have any type of decompensation due to their symptoms, I will make sure that there's clinicians to guide them through. I will be their Virgil. I know exactly what it's like to feel dead. And I need to wake up that spirit in these young men, let them feel the change. The sea change. It's like when you go out to sea and you come back in, you feel like your sea legs are coming, the world. When you have that type of change, these men need guidance and women to know that it's okay to feel a part of the world again. And when they come back, we'll keep them contacted with different veteran organizations and let them know that while maybe the whole world doesn't understand them, there are people that do and want to make sure that they get a fair shot.
So if I understand this correctly, Israel was chosen not because it's a Jewish state, but because it's a militarized state.
It was chosen primarily for 2 reasons. One is the whole idea that it's a veteran culture. It's a culture where serving is a common language and a common feel. The other part is due to the fact that the major religions all have some history there.
I see.
Whether they were founded or part of their early times were there. It's a very spiritual place. It's a place where intellect and soul aren't mutually exclusive. So it's a place where these men can see cutting-edge trauma treatment and get baptized in a river. Whether they're Christian or not is not paramount. The idea is the feel of coming back. They'll go to the Wailing Wall. They'll see the things that come from being around a place that is focused on you from the inside out and bringing them back.
I'm a little confused because on the one hand, you seem to speak of your Navy experience with great fondness. On the other hand, wasn't the Navy that caused you the PTSD? So which is it?
Well, in my case, that is a tension that many veterans have now as they're trying to figure out what they fought for and what they're giving up. In my unique case, as I said earlier, my biological father had a mental illness. There was a genetic pass down, and the stressors occurred. After he tried to end my life in the parking lot at St. Bart's, he eventually...
But he tried to run you down?
He tried to run me over while he was symptomatic. He followed the path that many veterans follow, which is they don't get help. They end up homeless. He had an MBA from Fordham, and he died in Paterson, New Jersey, not knowing me. I ended up in a VA hospital. They said I'd never get out of. I was held in restraints for over 24 hours due to my delusions. The post-traumatic stress disorder is from those restraints, not from active duty service. And the treatments that I have are in accord to that and not to military events.
And just can you briefly tell us how Rutgers played into your recovery?
Well, that's what's so unique about An American's Resurrection, because it's a 3-part book: life, death, resurrection. The coming alive part takes place on Rutgers campus as I come out of the VA hospital, the death section. When I walked into Rutgers, I walked into an American Studies class called Folk Songs and Ballads. And I sat there and I heard the lament of the blues singer. I didn't read it, I didn't intellectualize it, I felt it. And I heard laments that wouldn't be addressed. And while I sat there trying to figure out who I was and where I was going, I read Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk. And I heard about double consciousness because I had it. And I knew the veil. And while I was trying to figure out myself at Rutgers, 2 professors, one named Jackson Lears, the other one Leslie Fishbein, knew everything I was going through. I had my last episode in 2000. After I left, they stepped in. So in 2006, Rutgers had a tremendous football win against Louisville. I was there. I had a management master's. I was going about my life. And I said, if Rutgers can win, if they can change their identity, I can. And I left management and took an $800 a month job in mental health, going into state hospitals, and built everything from there. So Rutgers first gave me a home. Then it allowed me to be a myriad thinker under the tutelage of Jackson Lears. It gave me an intellectual mother in Leslie Fishbein. And it actually then gave me my destiny.
And just finally, I'm sure a lot of viewers are intrigued by what you've said here. How can people get a hold of your book?
An American's Resurrection is on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. If you Google it, it comes straight up. You can also go to my website, which is www.mylifemylimits.com, where you can go out and find it there. You'll also be able to find where I'm speaking and actually resources for suicide prevention, serious mental illness, and really any type of disconnection that someone's feeling.
Eric, I want to thank you for sharing your insights with our viewers and for sharing all that with us here on East Brunswick Television. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angus.